I'm Mike Wallace. This is Biography. Our story, John L. Lewis. For years, he was the most powerful figure in the American labor movement. Yet few people knew him well. He was a pugnacious, unpredictable man, a brooding, solitary giant. John L. Lewis enjoyed the mystery that surrounded his life. What makes me tick, he once asked? Is it power I'm after, or am I St. Francis in disguise? Characteristically, Lewis never answered the question. His enemies called John L. Lewis a power-mad egomaniac, a tyrant who ruthlessly crushed all opposition, a menace to the public. But to the men who wore a Union badge, Lewis was a champion, labor's avenging angel. He was as independent, as strong-willed as the coal miners he led. He was as rugged, as unyielding as the coal mines from which he came. From the collieries of Wales to the coal fields of the Ruhr, European miners come to America late in the 1800s to find new jobs and a new life. A strapping Welshman named Tom Lewis is one of them. Tom Lewis settles in Lucas, Iowa, a typical coal town, where wages are low and prices high, where the stench of burning slag fills the air, and coal dust puts a grimy coat on everything in sight. Tom Lewis's son, John Llewellyn Lewis, is born here in 1880. By the time he's 15 years old, young John Lewis has quit school for the tough, dirty, and dangerous work of ripping coal out of the earth. Primitive working conditions make mine disasters common occurrences. But the owners of the mines callously brush them off. After all, says one operator, miners don't suffer. Why, they can't even speak English. After many unsuccessful attempts, the miners of Lucas finally organize a union. They're led by a brawling, hard-drinking young man with a flair for public speaking, John L. Lewis. Lewis becomes a rising star in the miners' union. At a convention of the struggling Young American Federation of Labor, he comes to the attention of its founder, Samuel Gompers. Impressed by his aggressiveness, Gompers offers Lewis a job as an AFL organizer. Lewis eagerly accepts the assignment. Being a labor leader, Gompers says, is 90% showmanship. Lewis quickly picks up the tricks that turn a tame meeting into a fighting call for union solidarity. In 1917, Lewis makes one of his boldest moves. He grabs control of the entire United Mine Workers Union from its inept leaders. Through the 1920s, Lewis consolidates his hold on the miners' union. He demands and receives blind loyalty from his aides. When a union official complains about his autocratic rule and asks for a voice in running the union, Lewis snorts, "It's like Gabriel telling God how to run heaven." During the 1920s, the United States enters an era of prosperity. Working men with fat paychecks and full lunch pails feel that they don't need unions. Union membership drops drastically. almost overnight, the Great Depression of the 30s throws millions out of work. Now, membership in unions dwindles to its lowest ebb. In the midst of the crisis, Franklin Roosevelt becomes president, and his New Deal begins to pump life into the shattered American economy. The famous Blue Eagle of the NRA, the National Recovery Administration, flies over the nation. The law that created the NRA has a provision giving labor the right to organize and forcing management to bargain with the unions. To John L. Lewis, it is a godsend. Lewis sends Union shock troops into the mines, shouting, "Franklin Roosevelt wants you to join the Union." In a great surge, 300,000 miners marshal behind the Lewis banner. Now, says Lewis, we must act to form unions for the 25 million unorganized workers in the country. But the giant AF-of-L wants nothing to do with this mass of unskilled laborers.
The workers of this country want representation. They want organization. They want participation. They want protection. They want employment. And they're going to have those things through the leadership and the instrumentality of this new labor movement that you're forming.
Lewis quits the AF-of-L. He undertakes a free-swinging campaign to organize workers who never before have been able to join a union. But the response is disappointing. As head of the new union, Lewis knows that to make the movement successful, the CIO desperately needs national prestige, a victory in a major strike. Lewis takes dead aim on the steel industry. If this crouching lion can be routed, he says, then it's a safe bet the hyenas in the adjacent bush may be scattered along the plain. But as Lewis maps his campaign against the steel industry, a series of events in another industry makes him change his plan. A new member of the CIO, the United Auto Workers Union, begins a sit-down strike against the giant General Motors Corporation. The men not only refuse to work, but they also refuse to leave the plants. Lewis seizes the opportunity. This, Lewis decides, will be a better battleground for the CIO. Feed them, says Lewis. Feed the strikers and tell their friends to join them. But a company official declares, let them strike us. This will be the test. Violence breaks out on the picket line. Michigan's Governor, Frank Murphy, sends in the National Guard to maintain order. A Michigan court rules that the strikers must leave the plants. Governor Murphy now faces the ordeal of ordering National Guard troops to force the strikers out of the plants. Lewis challenges Murphy. I'll stand before the largest window in the plant and bare my bosom, Lewis cries. And when your troops fire, mine will be the first breast those bullets strike. Governor Murphy backs down. He refuses to send in the troops. Now, realizing that the workers can hold out indefinitely, General Motors gives up the fight. Lewis has his victory. soars. At a mass meeting in Detroit, 100,000 men salute John L. Lewis. In less than 1 year, he has forged a powerful organization of 3 million men. John L. Lewis can confidently say, "We are in the center now. The world will come to this office." John L. Lewis approaches the peak of his career. He has personally led a labor revolution that has produced the CIO, the biggest union movement in history.
Do you not know that the CIO is merely a dictatorship, and that the chairman of it set himself up in office without your will and contrary to your desire? Surely this is an unseemly action on your part. Don't you know that you're applauding a dictator? You know, it's a sheer waste in another way. You've actually wasted more energy in this convention this afternoon standing up and shouting and marching around the convention than the American Federation of Labor has expended in 57 years.
He frequently visits the White House both as a friend and consultant to the president. Goodwill between the president and the union leader will turn to bitterness in 1937. Lewis had hoped to get Roosevelt's support in his drive to organize all the steel mills. But when the smaller steel producers balk at signing with the CIO, the president takes no action. Then, on Memorial Day, 1937, a strike is called against one of the holdout companies, Republic Steel in Chicago. Police are sent to guard the plant. And late in the afternoon, strikers, in a holiday mood, arrive in the open field near the mill. Tension builds as the police and the workers draw closer and closer to each other. Then, for a reason that has never been made clear, the police fire the first shots of what will be called the Memorial Day Massacre. The president voices the anger and revulsion of the nation as he blames both management and labor for the violence. Roosevelt declares, "A plague on both your houses." The CIO leader lashes out at the president, calling him a Judas who has supped at labor's table and then deserted the movement. John L. Lewis carries the fight into the 1940 presidential elections.
President Roosevelt will not be reelected for the third term unless he has the overwhelming support of the men and women of labor. If he is therefore reelected, I will accept the result as being the equivalent of a vote of no confidence and will retire as President of the Congress of Industrial Organizations at its convention in November.
On Election Day, 1940, Franklin Roosevelt wins his third term. Lewis has lost the battle. At the CIO convention, just days after the re-election of Roosevelt, John John L. Lewis makes good his promise to resign as head of the CIO.
And I say to you that whomever you elect as my successor, give to him your unwavering, loyal support. Because without that support, his efforts will be as nothing.
In this emotion-packed atmosphere, Lewis hands the gavel of leadership over to Philip Murray. At the height of his career, a defiant Lewis had challenged the president and lost. His own impetuous gesture has forced him to step down from the leadership of the CIO. An embittered Lewis returns to the presidency of the Mine Workers Union. The labor empire he created is now ruled by men he personally trained. The crown princes, writes one reporter, have taken over for King Louis. His daughter, Catherine, is one of the few people he confides in, one of the few people he feels close to. My father, she says, can't have any friends. And then she adds, no great man can have friends. December 7th, 1941. The United States is thrust into World War II. Union leaders unanimously agree to sign a pledge not to strike for the duration of the war. For the moment, labor management quarrels give way to a united war effort. Suddenly, on May 1st, 1943, the stunned nation learns that Lewis has called the miners out on strike. John L. Lewis is reviled in the nation's press. His argument that the miners are starving is drowned out in the roar of national resentment. The president appeals over the head of Lewis directly to the miners.
I am speaking to the American people, and in particular to those of our citizens who are coal miners. You miners have sons in the Army, and Navy, and Marine Corps. I want to make it clear that every American coal miner who has stopped mining coal directly and individually is obstructing our war effort. The stars and stripes will fly over the coal mines. I hope every miner will be at work under that flag.
An uneasy truce ends the strike temporarily. Finally, Lewis wins many of his demands, but he pays a high price. To most Americans, the walkouts are unforgivable. Lewis has earned the contempt of millions of his fellow Americans. In 1946, miners follow John L. Lewis out of the pits again. Lewis begins his fight for a pension and welfare fund to be financed by a royalty payment on all the coal that's mined. The strike drags on, and coal supplies dwindle. To conserve fuel, railroads cancel trains. East Coast cities order non-essential lighting shut off. The so-called brownout takes effect. After 59 days, the strike ends. Lewis poses with Secretary of Interior Julius Krug to announce the settlement.
Sure, you'll agree with me, Mr. Lewis, that it's a compact that's fair to the operators and to the men alike. It's too bad we didn't have it 2 months ago.
At a Senate committee hearing less than a year later, Lewis explains why he is called still another massive strike.
Well, in the first year of the recent World War, in the full 12-month period in which the United States was engaged after the declaration of war by the Congress, The casualties in the coal mining industry exceeded the casualties in all our armed forces on any sea or in any land. Yet we can't get the mining laws enforced. We can't induce the several states to enforce their own mining laws. And we can't induce the government of the United States to carry out its own contracts and its own promises, to enforce its own safety rules and regulations. The director of the Bureau of Mines said there were 2 mines only that didn't violate the code. Now, on this particular day of our Lord, Mr. Krug has found 518 mines that he shuts down because they're unsafe. May God in heaven forgive him for not finding those out before and taking action long delayed before these men died. He just permitted them to die by negligence and inaction and by a dishonorable violation of his own agreement made with the United Mine Workers of America. His promise given to the coal miners and to the American people. That's all he's done. And in so doing, I think he's dishonored his office. And I think he's brutalized the mine workers. And I think he's brought confusion and bitterness and economic loss to the American people.
His angry testimony brings government action. Strict laws are passed, ensuring a new safety standard in the mines. Now, however, the miners face another threat: automation. Thousands of men are put out of work by machines, but Lewis takes no action. Without the machines, he says, there is too much danger, too much drudgery. Unions face new problems, new challenges, but Lewis leaves these to a new breed of labor leaders. He has decided at the age of 80 that he has reached the end of his long and turbulent career. There is a fight going on, he says sadly, and for the first time in 40 years, I'm not in it. We will miss the thundering sound of this rogue elephant, writes one reporter. It was the voice of a giant. The most eloquent appraisals of John L. Lewis came from his critics. One of them wrote, "Despite Lewis's vanity, his ruthlessness, his immense appetite for power, he is the most dynamic figure in the history of American labor." But John L. Lewis put it more simply. "I am," he thundered, "something of a man." Mike Wallace for Biography.